Continue now. Let's move on to the a few award races I want to talk about here. Let's first begin with the MVP discussion. So, we're getting here close to the end of the season. I just looked up the DraftKings odds as of Sunday that you and I are recording Sunday afternoon. SGA is still the favorite at minus 275, but Wemby is now second here behind him at plus 210. Luka is a little bit further at plus 1500, and then Jokic is falling down to plus 6000. So, after the Miami win, Wemby, made some headlines because he did, he basically was asked about, the MVP race, and he definitely said it should be a debate, and that his goal by the end of the season, these next 2 weeks, is to end that debate. Like, basically, there's going to be a player who's going to be sticking out, for the MVP, and he made the case for himself. He basically, argued that, defense is 50% of the game, and it is very undervalued in today's NBA. He also mentioned how he is the most impactful defensive player in the league. Of course, nobody would argue him on that. He mentioned how the Spurs really, took care of OKC. They went 4-1 against them this season, three wins against, their full squad or most of their core players. And then he also mentioned how, offensive impact is not just points, kind of what we said about his gravity that he pulls, the kind of shots he opens up for players, those avenues for other players to get inside the paint, or get opportunities from three. And there was also those headlines going around about how the Spurs are on pace to set the most corner three attempts in the league, for modern history here. And so, just regarding Victor's point about points, that's not everything on offense. I just wanted to talk about one of those points. So we look at SGA, he's averaging 31 points per game, 55, 38, 88 shooting splits, 9 free throw attempts. Here's where Wemby, his numbers do go down, 24 points per game, 50, 35, 82 shooting splits, only 6.9 free throw attempts. Luka, 33.7 points per game, 48, 37, 78 shooting splits, 10.1 free throw attempts. I was actually surprised to see Luka has more free throw attempts than SGA. And then Jokic, 27.9 points per game, 57, 39, 83, shooting splits, 7.5 free throw attempts. And then, so again, that's kind of, just wanted to mention the numbers there. So I guess here's my question to you. How much do the minutes, hurt Wemby's case? Both because, early in December when he was finally coming back from that first injury, they had him on a minutes restriction. He wasn't playing north of 30. Rarely did that ever happen. But then now that he's finally got healthy here in February and March, he can't play much because the team is so good and they're just blowing everybody out. So he can only play three quarters. If not, you don't want to have him in there with the team up by 35 points, and risk him getting injured. So I guess and that's the thing too about the minutes. You look at his minutes. SGA's at 33 minutes per game, 2,000 minutes for the season. Luka's at 36 minutes per game, 2,200 minutes for the season. Jokic is at 35 minutes, 2,000 minutes for the season. Then there's Wemby, only 29 minutes per game. Again, Victor's playing less than 30 minutes per game, again, partly because his team is so good, and that's just 1,700 minutes per game. And I know you can see this on the visual, but I have a bunch of different advanced metrics there for all the players. So that's my case to you. My question to you is, how much in a way, because of how good the Spurs are, is the minutes kind of question hurting Victor because he can't quite put up some of the stats some of these other players are putting up on offense?
Yeah, and this has been a big discussion online over the past week, especially after Victor made the case. To piggyback off of that, I think his name is Chris Kraus of 48 Minute Sports actually wrote an article about his conversation with Jared Weiss and Tim Reynolds about this conversation they had in the locker room. A lot of people have kind of commented about how, it was arrogant of Wemby to say this. But if you read what the conversation in the locker room actually was, it's really revealing into how he's thinking about this. And he's really thoughtful about what matters to different people. But going back to the race, I think what I'm having a harder time with, even as someone who watches the Spurs and really analyzes all of that, is even if the minutes were equal, I'm not entirely sure if SGA should be discounted as the MVP just for the body of work he has put up this season. We talk about Wemby, and he had a couple of stretches early in the season where the offense wasn't working quite right. Teams were trying different things on defense, and the Spurs were having to adjust to that. They were trying to do different things on offense too and move Wemby around the court, and the Spurs have really found a system they're comfortable with now. But at the beginning of the year, there were some moments where it was a little bit tougher. Jokic had this incredible start to the season. He had this big injury, and he came back and he wasn't quite the same.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Luka has been excellent for a month, but there's a lot of questions about his play before that.
Yeah.
So you look at SGA as a player who's been really consistent throughout the entire season. Their team has been incredibly injured. He hasn't had his second best offensive weapon nearly all year. When Jalen Williams is playing, J-Dub is playing, he hasn't even really been himself. He hasn't been very good. He's missed a ton of games. AJ Mitchell has missed a ton of games. The defensive playmakers have missed a ton of games. So the fact that he's able to still perform at this level that everyone expected, despite all of that, and that you can't really point to a stretch of the season for him that you can be down on. One of the things you have in the graphic is net points, and we're talking about like how well is someone performing throughout the season. You add, each of these different things, and you can average it out and all that stuff. And his is 10.2 versus Wemby's 6.5, and I think that just goes to what I was talking about, where over these past 25, 26 games, I think Wemby has a case to be the best player in the league over that stretch. But you're talking about the whole season MVP, and so it's a little bit difficult for me to come to a place of like, why not Shea, even with Wemby's greatness lately, even despite the minutes thing. One of the things I did start looking at though, and this, I hate going down to like one stat, but looking at the minutes are, 250 different, almost 300, whatever it is, 340 different. Right now, you can look on playbyplaystats.com, pppstats.com, and for the season, the Spurs have outscored their opponents by 630 points with Wemby on the court. And Thunder have outscored opponents by 664 points with SG on the court. So one of the things that I've kind of started looking at is if by the end of the season, Wemby leads in that number, you could make a valid case that despite missing all of those minutes, his like per minute value is still overcoming that minute deficit. And that's not to say, I think Wemby has a really good case, and I think he's going to try to continue making his case for the last 8 games. But it's going to be a tight one down the stretch because I don't think Shea is going to let up either. So it's going to be very interesting to watch. I do think that those two are the top 2 right now, and I think it's a pretty wide margin after them. And I know that's what even the odds are saying, but I know there's a lot of Luka fans and Laker fans online that think that this last month maybe should propel him. But I think it's going to be a battle between Wemby and Shea to the very end.
Yeah, and so just 2 things I want to say too. Like I think going to what your point about SGA, I think so basically we're saying consistency MVP. I think it's SGA this season. I mean, because not only what I do is I monitor the weekly awards for the NBA that they announce and also the monthly awards. And so honestly, dude, like every single week, SGA's name is either winning the Western Conference Player of the Week or he's a nominee. Now, Luka and Wemby, I will say, have been winning it as well lately in these last 2 months, and or getting their names as a nominee. But like you said, for the entire season, when he was on the floor, SGA was weekly being a player who was one of the top players in the Western Conference. So again, I think that's why if you're going to argue that SGA should be the consistency MVP for the entire season, yes. Now, as far as impactful MVP to end the season, I think that's definitely Wemby as of right now. And then I also have a point, too, about where Victor, how much are the voters going to weigh, defense as well. The fact that, you can look at more to the advanced numbers, but then there's also data that doesn't tell you the whole story, like his derailed drives that he does. Every game, multiple derailed drives when nobody wants to go inside against him, even try to challenge him. And so, those kind of things don't get mentioned in stat sheets. So, how much are they going to put more weight, the voters this year, on defense, considering what he's doing on that end of the floor, like he mentioned himself. And then also one thing that's just going to keep Victor playing is the fact that, he and Jokic have to basically keep playing here to end the season. Wemby and Jokic as of Sunday afternoon, they both need to still get to that 65 game limit. There, Wemby's 5 games away from reaching it, so he needs to play in 5 more games of the Spurs' last 8, and Jokic needs to play in at least 6 more games of the Nuggets' last, I think 7. And then also, SG and Luka, they're not there either, but they're pretty close. They only need to play in 3 more each. So that's also something to mention, is that Victor basically has to keep playing and putting up some of these numbers here down the stretch. Here's also one of the things I've seen, and I was kind of talking about this when I was in San Antonio with some of the media members, is do you think that, I mean, it's a very difficult road to do this right now, but if the Spurs were somehow to get the number 1 seed from OKC by the end of the year, do you think that would give the voters enough to propel him to number 1? I kind of think that would make the case. Or what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it would be something for the voters to hang their hat on. And I think that's important because, like you said, defensive metrics are lacking, period. And you talked about drives averted per game. We don't have anything that measures plays from the playbook just taken out because Wemby is going to be on the floor, and you just can't do that. Like, how do you measure that with anything meaningful? But we know with our eyes and based on the record, you have a guy who's literally making the most important part of the court just off limits completely. And I think the stats have a hard time really capturing that to that level. I think because the stats kind of fall short in capturing that, I think having something like, oh, he also has the first overall seed gives the voters something really tangible to point to, more than like he warps the court, which he does, but our defensive metrics really lack. It's not like Steph. When Steph warped the court on offense during his MVP run in the mid 2010s, Curry, that was easy to see in the stats. It's harder to see that with Wemby, I think. What's interesting is the Spurs are 2 games behind for the first seed. And looking at this, Shea actually, they have, I think, 8 games left, and he only needs 5 games to hit it. The Spurs have 8 games left. Or no, he only needs 3 games to hit it. He can miss 5 games. He can miss 5 games. Wemby can only miss 3 games. Well, the difference between those 2 numbers is 2. So you could have the situation where Wemby is playing 2 more games over these last 8 stretch than Shea is playing if they decide to rest him, which is a really interesting wrinkle in this. Like if they go full rest because it's like, oh, you know, we care more about being ready for the playoffs than the 1 seed. You know, the 1 seed is a season-long thing. It's not about the last 8 games, which is something that Coach Dagnall has talked about a little bit. Could that be the swing factor in the Spurs taking the number 1 seed because Wemby has to play 2 more games than Shea? I hadn't looked at it that way, but seeing it here on paper, it's like, oh, like they could stop playing Shea 2 games before the Spurs have to stop playing Wemby, and that could be significant in terms of do the Spurs get that number 1 seed or not, which is an interesting wrinkle to watch down the stretch.
Yeah, and just thinking about the post game comments after the Bucks game, it was funny because you know how Wemby's kind of just so direct and like so blunt. He doesn't like hide anything. Like he's gonna speak what's on his sleeve. You know what's on his yeah. So basically, like they asked Coach Johnson, if the Spurs are still now that they got a top 2 seed, are they chasing OKC? And he's like, Coach Johnson gave like the safe answer. He's like, OKC doesn't lose very much if you've seen them lately. Basically saying they're not quite chasing them. Then Devin Vassell was asked about it, and Devin gives a safe answer. He's like, we just take it 1 game at a time. And then Victor's asked about it. Victor's like, of course we're trying to get the best record in the league. Like just like so truthful about what he's saying.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Which is funny because like it might help his MVP case, but if we're talking about can the Spurs win a title, if Minnesota and the Nuggets stay in that 4 or 5 spot and the Lakers and the Rockets stay in that 3-6 spot, the 2nd seed is actually looking pretty good for the Spurs to make it to the conference finals without having to play. If they only have to play one of OKC, Nuggets, or Timberwolves on the way to the finals, I think it doesn't mean they automatically will make it to the finals, but it greatly increases their chances. If they have to play the Nuggets and the Thunder, and the Nuggets are healthy all of a sudden, like that's going to be a hard road to go through. But their current bracket is set up kind of perfectly for them to make a really deep run.
Yeah,
and obviously those teams are so close from like 4 to 6 that can change in a moment. But right now I'm kind of like, I think you might want to stay right where you're at.
Yeah, number 2. So yeah, looking at that for a playoff perspective.